Hello everyone and welcome back to Insights at DDLynn Designs, a unique twist in the art of wire. Today I want to share with you all about weaving. We're going to be discussing and learning about gauges, tension, gap space, slack, grip, tying off, and holding your wire. So before we get started, if you're new to my channel, I'm trying to build myself up in the YouTube social media ladder so that I can continue to do these tutorials for free. I'm hoping to get monetized. It's not much, but it's helpful and it takes a lot of time to put these together. So I really appreciate you being here. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. So hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to hit the bell, and any comments, please leave them below, and I promise you I'll get back to you. So the first thing we're going to talk about is weaving, as I mentioned, and all about weaving, which means that we're going to talk about our gap space. So when we're first setting our wire, we have a tendency when we're new, and it happens to all of us, that we want to grip down really hard. So I'm going to start off with 3 wires, and these are just scrap. And there are different ways to hold your wires and support them. So I want to talk about the clamps. You can get different kinds of clamps. These you can get at the hardware store. And all you simply do is either put your wires in on the side, or you can put them dead ahead. What I found as a beginner is, in the beginning, it was hard for me to figure out my gap space because they would get too close or too tight. So the other alternative with a clamp is, this is also called a ring clamp. It's a jeweler's ring clamp. And it's the same process of putting your wires in between these 2 jaws that are leather binded on the inside. And that's a little background noise. So basically what I found was more helpful is if you kind of bring your points together at the bottom a little bit closer, then slip this into your clamp. And this will help you with your gap space, okay? So we're gonna do this with the clamp. And this is what I mean. They'll start moving around a little bit until you get it in there really tight, and you can actually adjust it. And all you're gonna do is slip this wooden piece in the back straight into the clamp. So you can see that they're not perfectly apart, and all we're going to do is just squeeze them in. So one of the other things that's difficult when we're first weaving and using a clamp is finding our finger position, and that's a very personal choice. So I'm using a 24 gauge weaving wire because for demonstration purposes, I want to show you the difference in 28 gauge, which I'll go to in a little bit, but I also wanted you to see the procedure. So having a ring clamp or a hardware clamp helps you support your wires without bending down on them. And again, as we're first starting, we tend to really squeeze on our wires, and then you ask yourself, how do I stop bending my wires? It comes with practice, but I promise you, your tools and look for technique will help you so much accelerate your journey in this ancient art of wire. So let's talk about weaving our wire. So again, this is a 24 gauge, so it's going to be harder to slide through. But what's most important is when you're bringing your wire through and we've set our gap space, trying to make sure I'm staying in frame here. Y'all have no idea how hard this is because I can't see my camera. So what I have found is giving myself slack. So we're talking about grip, which you can control your grip by using a ring clamp. And then when you're starting your weave, we're going to do 3 coils on the bottom. It's helpful to train your wire. Basically, tell the wire where you want it to go. So if you noticed, I pushed up on that wire. Then I'm coming in between and I'm letting go. That's where your slack comes in. Then I'm pushing and pulling, and then coming around the back, and I'm pulling as well. So I'm going to do that again so you can see this technique. So I'm telling my wire where I want it to go. So I'm setting myself up. So I've pushed it over my base wire, and these gaps are rather large. I'm really doing this right now just so that you can see the technique. Then I'm going to bring my wire through, and I let go. And then I'm going to bring it down and back under. And I'm always supporting and guiding that wire. So let's do that again. I'm going to push my wire over the base wire. I'm telling it where I want to go. So I'm setting it up and I'm pre-positioning it. Okay? Then I'm coming through, letting go. And then as I'm setting my wire up, I'm pushing and pulling. So I'm going to bring these a little bit closer together because I'm going to continue with this weaving so that you can get more of a feel. So I'm going to go over 2 wires. I'm setting myself up again. Then I'm coming around those 2 wires in between. And if you watch closely, I'm always letting go of my wire, okay? So I'm coming around the back, and I'm going to go over again, and I'm extending the distance that I'm going because I'm telling that wire where I want it to go, and then I'm going to go back in between. So I've gone over my wires 1 and 2, if you count from the bottom, 1 to 3. And then I'm going to come back in between. And if you notice again, I've let go. Then I'm going to push and pull. So now I'm coming around wires 2 and 3. And I'm going to come back in between wires 1 and 2. And if you watch closely, I'm always letting go. So it's really important when you're starting out weaving that and it will come naturally the more weaving that you do, but that you give yourself some slack each time you're coming in between your wires. So let's take a look at that. We're going to come off the top this time. Again, I let go. I'm pushing my wire in, going all the way around, and I'm letting the wire do the work for me, but I'm not pulling so tight to where I'm pulling my wires together. So you have to watch your tension. If your wire is setting flush against the back, then your tension is perfect. If you see your wires start coming together, and I'm going to give you an example of that. So let me pull my wires together. Do you see that pulling in on the top? I'm pulling too tight. So you always want to allow your finger, and I'm going to show you how to do this, to support the wire in the back. And you're not going to be able to do that a lot when you're first starting on a ring clamp, but you will be able to do it when you're working off a ring clamp. So I'm coming around the back, and I'm supporting that wire in the back with my finger, keeping it flush against all 3 base wires. Again, I'm training that wire. And I let go. There's my slack. Then I'm going to push it in and pull down. Then you want to either get your nylon jaw pliers and push your wires together, or you can use your pliers or your chain nose. And additionally, you always want to watch your wires and make little adjustments and corrections as we go. So that's how it works on a ring clamp. So let's go ahead and take it off the ring clamp, and then in a minute we're going to be discussing how to protect your fingers. I just did, if I can find it, this bee. And I also did a bracelet. So prior to doing this bee, my finger was really, really sore. So I have found that these are called silicone or rubber finger guards. I cut the tip off because it's a little bit too thick over my nail, and I had a hard time feeling that, but you just have to try it for yourself. But because these are silicone and they really hug your finger, your wire slides beautifully right through them. So let's take a look at that. So here's the first thing I want to address. When you immediately come off of a ring clamp, your wires naturally will want to cross over. So you can do a couple of things as you're starting out to support your wires. Simply get some masking tape, and once you've started your initial weave, or you can tape them prior to your weaving, whatever works best for you, tape the back. It's going to do two things for you. It's going to keep your wires from sliding up and down, and it's going to keep them from crossing over. So I want to show you the technique of how to hold your wire and support it in the back every time you make a new rotation over a single wire or two wires or more. So we're going to do that 2 again, and I've got my rubber finger guard on, and I'm supporting my wires firmly, but I'm not digging in or bending into them. So you want to always work. Keep your fingers very closely to where you left off on your weave. That'll keep you from, one, jackknifing your wires, which means bending them up as you're sliding them back, and also keep you in alignment with your wires. So I'm going to go up and over, training it again, and then if you watch closely, I'm letting go, then pushing in, coming around the back. Now here's what I'm talking about supporting your wire in the back. If you keep your finger on the back, it'll keep it relatively in the position that you want, and then you come over again, and as you're coming around your weave or in between a weave, notice I let go. There was my slack. You're going to lift your finger up and move it out of the way, okay? Then you reposition yourself. This will not come naturally in the beginning when you're first starting off. Now, I've trained my wire already to come around the back. I'm supporting that wire with my finger. So I'm holding it in the position that I want. Then I'm going to come back in between wires 1 and 2. And again, watch your spacing and how your wires are moving together. I don't have them taped off, so they're going to have a tendency to want to squeeze in. So, and I'll show you what the taping looks like. Then you want to go back over your 2 wires, and then I'm pressing that wire down in the back, and I'm doing this all in slow-mo. When I do it naturally, my finger always goes back up, back up, back up. So I'm coming back in between, pushing my wire in, over, and then I get my finger behind it, pushing that wire against the back of the frame. And this is what I mean by them crossing over. And then I'm going to come back in between wires 2 and 3. I'm pushing in and rolling around the back and over the bottom wire and pushing. And so now I'm going to pick up my speed. And the first thing that I'm going to do, and by the way, you guys, this is scrap wire, which is why it's all bent. I'm going to get some tape. Uh-oh, I don't know where my tape went. So I guess I'm not going to get some tape. Bear with me. I'll get some tape and I'll be right back. So I got myself a little thin piece of tape. And what I'm going to do, and you will find this if you're just starting out, so helpful, again, to keep your wires from crossing over and as well from sliding back and forth. And you're going to find that you have a tremendous amount of support because, again, they're not going to be going up and down. Now, always as you're going, make adjustments. So, again, when we're weaving, we want to really watch how much we're pulling, work on our slack and our grip. We can control the gripping by taping or clamping. Okay, so I'm going to do this faster, how I would normally do it. Now, granted, this is 24 gauge wire, so I'm going to shift off here in a second to 28 so that you can see the difference with the movement of the wire. This is a thicker wire, so you can't pull it as easily and slide it straight through. You have to control it a lot more. So probably when starting out, 28 gauge would be your best bet, but I would encourage you to maybe buy a small spool of 26 and 24 to really practice on it, because if you can get that down, you can weave with anything. So let's go ahead. I'm going to work at my normal speed and hoping that you can catch the techniques of me using my finger in the back as well as catching my slack. So I'm going over wires 1 and 2. And again, if you notice, I'm pulling and training that wire, and then I'm letting go, get my finger around the back, supporting that wire, keeping it in its position, then coming back through and letting go. I'm going to get my nylon jaw pliers and I'm going to push that pattern in. So again, I'm going over these wires, letting go, over them again, letting go, coming back in between. I'm pushing that wire in and coming over. I'm training it, so it's already pre-positioned. Then I'm going to come back in between, letting go and over, and then in between, letting go, all the way around the back, and then I'm going to push that wire with my index finger against the back, coming over the bottom and bringing it back down towards me. So now I'm going to show you this technique with 28 gauge. I just wanted you to see it better with a thicker gauged wire. So before we go on into a 28 gauge, I want to show you the best way to tie off your wire. Now, this is going to depend on the gauge of wire that you're using. I'm using a thicker gauge. As I mentioned, this is 24. So I don't need to coil off as much. The lighter the gauge, the more easier it will unravel or untangle, especially when we're working in an open pattern weave like this. So I'm going to just push over, come in between, let go. I'm going to slide it around the back, and I'm going to close this off just with 3 coils. Now, you can either snap your wire, which I've showed in many other videos, or you can trim it. If you don't have these flesh cutters, they're very inexpensive. They're super, super sharp. I've had them for 2 years now. I've been wire weaving 2 years in March, so just a little over 2 years. And I'm proud to say I'm in a local gallery here in Sedona, and I'm just amazed at how far I've come, and I know that you will come that far too if you love this. If you love this and you can't stop thinking about it, I promise you, you will accelerate your journey in this magical ancient art. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to move my wire out of my way. I found that by moving your wire out of the way, you can get in closer. And these are so sharp, and I have a link to these down below. I think they're about $11 now. I've never bit into the blade, and I have with my Tronics and other pliers. And then what you want to feel for is a Sharpie. These are a little, sharp edge. These are so sharp. I can get in so close that seldom do I have to come in, and I can't even feel where this is at, and push that back. So I wanted to talk, this is all part of weaving. So let's start from the beginning again, and now we're going to be using 28 gauge. And again, I'm going to be working off 3 pieces of scrap wire. And now I want to show you how to start out by taping your wire in the beginning. So I'm going to get a little piece of tape. Now, this may be hard if you're just starting out. I know I mention that a lot because my videos in general are designed to be very detail-oriented to really help beginners. Because I didn't get any of this when I started, and most of it I learned on my own. I would watch other artists that I am eternally grateful for and to. but there wasn't a lot of detail. It was more of just a, tutorial. And with all due respect, they were fabulous, but in the beginning, they were extremely over my head. So I've set my wires in a position that I want because I'm working with 28 gauge. And let me give you an idea so that you know how to create the right gap space. So I'm going to pull the wire off the spool. And how you can determine your gap space is by bringing your wire in between. So I'm bringing my weaving wire in between these wires, and that's telling me that I have significant gap space. So I could probably pull them together a little bit, but sometimes you want them further apart based on the design that you're going to be doing. So I'm going to tape these wires like this and just fold them over together. So this is going to give me a tremendous amount of support. They're not going to shift, as I mentioned earlier, and they're not going to cross over each other as much. So you could, at this point, put your wires in your clamp. I found this in the beginning as a beginner difficult to, because I didn't know what to do with my hands. Everybody's different. I just found it awkward and bulky. You may not. Give it a go. You can find clamps with smaller grips on them, but I found a really lightweight one, and I found that my wire kept slipping out. So you might want to take a piece of wire, 3 pieces of wire, to the hardware store when you do that. They won't slip out from here. But you might want to take your wires to the hardware store and see if they're holding your wires firmly, okay? So let's start this procedure all over again. Again, this is all about grip, gap, slack, and tying your wire off. So your tension is part of your grip. That's 26. I want to use 28 because I want you to see the difference of how much easier it is to use the 28, but 28 will allow you to slide a lot more. So that also means that your wire will have a tendency to move more, going up and down, where with this 24 gauge or 26 gauge, it doesn't move as much. We have to purposely put it into the position that we want. So I'm going to start with my tail over the top of all of my wires, and I'm just going to bring it back and around, and everybody has a different technique. This is not the same technique for me every time. I just found for beginners, this helps you hold your wire in place, okay? Now you can either come in between or you can come under. It just depends on what you're most comfortable with. So I'm going to come in between to start my weaving pattern, and I'm going to watch my spacing. Again, these are scraps, so they're a little bent. And now I'm going to start my weaving pattern. And I'm going to go over the base wire. I'm still using the same technique of telling that wire where I want it to go. I'm pushing it up and over, and then I'm going to come back down between, and I've let go. And I'm using my finger to push it in. Then I'm going to roll over that wire again and come back in between. I've let go. And your tape, by the way, is helping you support your wires as well. You'll tend to have more of a flat hold than digging your finger into the wire and bending it. Then I'm going to go back over that wire again, letting go, and come back in between, and I'm pushing it and then pulling it back towards me. So now I'm going to go over wires 1 and 2, letting go, back underneath, and I'm not pulling so tight to pull the wires together. So this is a very forgiving gauge of wire. It's very thin, so you don't have to pull really hard, and practice. Your tension will come with time. If your hand is cramping up, it's because your grip is too tight. Okay, so just tell yourself, relax, stretch your hands out, your fingers out, and then come back in and try to weave and be very conscious of just holding your wire, okay? So I'm going to come back in between, I let go, over the top, in between, I let go, over the top, and this time I'm going to come back down. I'm going to do a 2-2 weave. I'm going to come back down all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to go over wires 1 and 2. I let go, and back over, let go. And you, because this is such a light gauge wire, you can easily push it in with your fingers, or you can use your nylon jaw pliers. So when you're first starting out, I remember an artist I was watching saying every, 5 repeats you should push back. I think that when you're starting to really understand your tension, and I didn't know this at first, but you learn as you go, and I think it's better to complete one full set or one repeat of this particular pattern. So if we call this a 2-2-2, that'll be our first set or our first pattern. Push it back just so that you get the feeling of cinching your wires up, and it keeps everything in a line better. You can always come in with your needle nose. These are petite needle nose, and straighten things out if you want. So now I'm going to do 3 coils again, and I'm going to speed up a little bit just so that you hopefully can catch, and I'm working off the spool so I'm getting a little tangled there. You can catch some of my techniques. Letting go, pushing over, letting go, cinching in. Over 2, letting go. I'm letting go every time I come in between my wires. Coming back down, and I'm pulling but also pushing, and then in between I'm letting go. Coming over, training that wire. Over again. And if you watch, you should be able to see me leave the slack in my wire. So over, and that's the training process. Once you become proficient at this, you won't be so aggressive with your movements. I'm aggressive with them right now because I want you to see what I'm doing, and I really hope this comes out. I know I get out of frame a lot, you guys. It's a process. So anyways, let's just get back to this. So now I'm going to change my pattern to make it a little bit more complex so that you can see different ways that I'm moving with the wire. So we've got our gap space. Now, if you're working with really, really, really long wires, you can always bend your tips out. This just gives you more room. In general, as wire artists, and by the way, this is an art, we have a tendency, which is natural, to have always excess wire. And the reason is we never know what we're going to actually need it for. And in the beginning, it's very difficult to understand how much wire you're going to need. I'll be doing a tutorial on specifically how to measure your wire. Would love your feedback if you'd like to see something like that. So now I'm going to go over wire 1, back underneath, and I'm hoping that you're watching for my slack. Then I'm moving my finger up because I want to support that wire in the back. So I'm going to go over wires 1 and 2, in between wires 1 and 2, over. Again, I'm training that wire in between wires 2 and 3, coming all the way around the back. Then I'm going to go over. And again, I'm exaggerating my movement because I want you to see how I'm telling that wire, here's my slack, where I want it to go. So now I'm going to go over all the wires. So here's what's a more difficult task to do when you're first starting out. We tend to pull too tight, and what will happen, and I'll show you again, if we pull really tight, do you see that wire moving in closer to this wire? So you want to make sure that when you're coming over the wire, if you press against the back, that wire should be perfectly aligned. So I came all the way over, and I'm going to come over again. I'm supporting that wire in the back, and I'm going to come around the back, and I don't know if you caught that, me lifting my finger up out of the way and then immediately pushing it back down. Then I'm going to go over again. So I'm going to do this in slow-mo, moving my finger out of the way and then bringing it back down and pushing that wire against the core wires. So now I'm going to repeat that pattern that I started on this side, and it's much harder to see 28 gauge than it is 24. So now I'm going to rock over the base wire. There's my slack. Then over 1 and 2, there's my slack. In between, always giving myself slack and releasing that wire when I'm coming in between two wires. Going over the top, there's my slack. Coming all the way around to the bottom, over the bottom wire, and pushing that in. So I'm now going to do my 3 full wraps. So over, and I push it around the back. And it's an adjustment with your fingers sliding into that, sliding closer and closer to where you're leaving off. Over and around the back. So I'm lifting my finger up, over and around the back. And don't worry if they separate. We're just going to slide them together. Again, 28 gauge is very forgiving, and we're going to lock that in anyways on the bottom. So now I'm going to go over my base wire, back in between, and pull it down. So we've talked about gap space. We've talked about different gauges of wire, letting go of your wire, your grip, how to secure your wires, which will give you more support. So now I'm going to move at my regular speed. I'm just separating these out on top. You want to be very mindful as you're weaving to always watch your wires coming together or spreading too far apart or one of them getting a little wonky. So I'm going to start that process again, going over 1 and 2, in between 1 and 2, over 2 and 3, in between 2 and 3, push them together all the way around the back and in between 1. So now I'm going to go over 3 times and around the back, the bottom wire, then over, in between, and I'm hoping you're catching my slack, over, in between, all the way around 3 times. And I'm going to push them together. So now I'm going to do this slowly but continuously and without talking. You're going to be like, yay. Oops, I'm sorry, I forgot to tie off on the bottom. Oh, I think I did that again. That's all right. I can change up as I go. I'm going to change this pattern because I want you guys to see it a little bit better. It's actually really, really cool. I'm thinking too much about what I want to say to you guys, so I'm forgetting what I'm doing. But that's okay. It's all about weaving, not about me teaching you a pattern right now. I'm just hoping you're picking up on the techniques. So now I'm going to start working my finger again, holding that wire in the back. You'll find that you need to do that a lot more with a thicker gauged weaving wire. This, by the way, this pattern is really cool if you want to make just a bracelet. It's a really nice weave with just a little tiny spacing in between, and you can do as many complete wraps as you want. But if you're going to do a bracelet, I would recommend using a thicker gauge wire or using more wires, at least 5 wires if you're using 20 gauge with 28 gauge. So there you have it. We've talked about our gap, our grip, our tension, taping off. And so here's a really cool trick if you want to snap your wire versus cutting it, because 28 gauge is so light. I'm going to coil off 3 times. That's 2. That's 3. Now, in order to snap your wire, you always have to be coming in between 2 wires. And you want to make sure that you hold your weaving firmly. I'm going to go ahead and cut this instead of snapping it right off the spool. And all you're going to do is wiggle back and forth, jiggle, or work in a circular motion, and it snaps clean off. If you don't hold your wires firmly, 28 gauge is so light that it will just slide up as you're doing that. So make sure that you're holding your weaving firmly. So I hope that you got something out of all about weaving. Again, this wasn't really to teach a weave pattern, but more about the process of weaving and all the other aforementioned statements that I've made. Again, please leave me your comments and your feedback. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I will get back to you. And just for inspiration, I made this beautiful kind of modern idea of a bee. And 2 years ago, I couldn't have dreamed of making something like this. This is my own design. I work impromptu, and everything I do just happens as I'm doing it. I didn't plan to make this a bee. This is actually 2 separate elements here. So these are 2 different pieces that I connected together that I had sitting aside for several weeks, and I didn't know what to do with them. And I had this stone on my workstation for some time. And all of a sudden I thought, well, let me make a bail and tuck it through. And then I was looking at these and I thought, I wonder if I could attach those. And that's how it happens for me. It's very impromptu. Recently at one of my gallery showings, someone asked me, what artists are my inspiration? And I said, 5,000 years ago, the ancient art of wire. Dates back before the Phoenicians. So please, please continue to keep this in art. It's magical. I wish for all of you all that you wish for yourselves. And as Thumper said in Bambi, please be kind. If you ain't got nothing nice to say, then don't say nothing at all. Bye for now.